The monitoring station floated in the darkness between stars, a small metal structure that had been watching the same empty region of space for over 30,000 years. Commander Vethril sat alone at his console, his 4 eyes half closed with boredom. Nothing ever happened here. Nothing had happened here since before his grandfather's grandfather was born. The Sol System, as the ancient records called it, was a dead zone, a graveyard. 40,000 years ago, a young species called humans had lived there on a small blue planet they named Earth. They had just begun to explore their own solar system when their star betrayed them. A massive solar flare, larger than anything recorded in galactic history, had swept through the inner planets. The Galactic Confederation had detected the event and done nothing. Humans were considered too primitive to save, too insignificant to matter. Their deaths were recorded in a single line of text in the Confederation's historical archives. Vethril had read that line many times. He found humans fascinating in a way he could not explain to his colleagues. During his long shifts at the monitoring station, he would study the old files that had been recovered from human satellites and probes. Their music was strange and emotional. Their art was wild and unpredictable. They had a concept called hope that seemed to drive them forward even when logic demanded they stop. Vethril did not fully understand hope, but he wished he did. His species, the Korthan, lived for thousands of years and made decisions based purely on probability and reason. They did not hope. They calculated. But something about those old human recordings stirred feelings in Vethril that he had no words for. The console beeped. Vethril opened his eyes and looked at the screen with mild irritation. Probably another piece of ancient debris drifting through the dead zone. He had logged thousands of such events over the centuries. Broken satellites, the shells of old spacecraft, rocks and ice, and the scattered remains of a civilization that had been dead longer than most species in the galaxy had existed. But this was different. The signal was weak, barely detectable, coming from somewhere deep within the Sol System. Vethril adjusted his instruments and focused on the source. His 3 hearts began to beat faster as the data appeared on his screen. It was not debris. It was not random noise. It was a structured transmission, a repeating mathematical sequence, the kind of pattern that could only be produced by intelligent life. Vethril's hands trembled as he refined the signal. This was impossible. The Sol System had been dead for 40 millennia. Every probe sent into the region had confirmed total extinction. There was nothing there but burned rocks and ancient ruins. The mathematical sequence ended, and something else began. A voice, speaking in a language that Vethril recognized from his studies of the old files. Human English. This is the Starship Wanderer, calling any station. Humanity endures. We are coming home. Vethril sat frozen at his console. He played the message again, then a 3rd time, then a 4th. Each time, the same words. The same impossible words. Humanity endures. He thought about what this meant. For 40,000 years, the galaxy had believed humans were extinct. They had been forgotten by most species, remembered only by scholars and historians as a cautionary tale about the dangers of developing too slowly in a hostile universe. The Galactic Confederation had moved on. New species had risen and fallen. Empires had expanded and collapsed. And all that time, somewhere in the darkness, humans had survived. Vethril knew he had to report this immediately. The Confederation Council would need to be informed. Diplomatic protocols would need to be activated. But for a long moment, he simply sat there, listening to the message repeat, "We are coming home." There was something in those words that made his chest feel tight. He did not understand why. Humans were just another species, one of thousands that had existed throughout galactic history. Their survival should have been a simple matter of record keeping, a correction to the historical archives. But Vethril had studied humans. He knew their stories. He knew about their wars and their kindness, their cruelty and their compassion. He knew about the music they made and the art they created. He knew about their stubborn refusal to accept defeat, even when defeat was the only logical outcome. And now they were coming back. Vethro finally activated his communication system and sent a priority message to Confederation headquarters. Within hours, the news would spread across the galaxy. Species that had not thought about humans in millennia would suddenly remember them. Old records would be pulled from archives. Debates would begin about what to do, how to respond, whether these returning humans were a threat or an opportunity. But all of that would come later. In this moment, Vethral was alone with the signal, alone with the voice of a species that had refused to die. He listened to the message one more time, and for the first time in his long life, he thought he understood what hope meant. The signal continued to repeat, reaching out across the void. After 40,000 years of silence, humanity was speaking again. And the galaxy, whether it was ready or not, was about to listen. In the great council chambers of the Confederation, lights began to flash as the news arrived. Ancient beings stirred from their contemplations. Crystalline entities pulsed with sudden energy. Hive minds buzzed with confused activity. The message spread from station to station, world to world, system to system. Humans were alive. The species that everyone had written off as a failure, a footnote, a minor tragedy in the long history of the cosmos, had somehow survived. Not just survived, but built a ship, developed technology, sent a signal across the stars, and they were coming home. No one knew what to expect. No one knew what humanity had become during their long absence. Had they changed? Had they grown stronger or weaker? Were they still the emotional, unpredictable creatures that the old records described? Or had they evolved into something else entirely? Only time would tell. But one thing was certain. The galaxy would never be the same. The return of humanity would change everything, in ways that no one could predict or control. And somewhere in the darkness between stars, a small ship called the Wanderer continued its journey, carrying the descendants of a species that had refused to accept extinction. They had been forgotten by the universe, but they had never forgotten themselves. Now they were coming back to remind the galaxy of what humanity could do. 40,000 years before the signal was detected, a man named Danny Cole stood on the bridge of a ship that was never meant to fly. The Wanderer had been a construction vessel designed to build space stations in orbit around Earth. It was not fast. It was not elegant. But it was big, and it was the only ship available. When the scientists confirmed that the sun was about to kill them all, Danny was 34 years old, a construction foreman who had spent most of his life building things in space. He had never wanted to be a leader. He had never wanted to make decisions that would affect thousands of lives. But when the government came to him and asked if he could convert the Wanderer into a colony ship in less than 6 months, he said yes. Because someone had to say yes. Because giving up was not something Danny Cole knew how to do. His partner in this desperate project was a woman named Lisa Murray. She was an engineer, 10 years younger than Danny, with sharp eyes and a quick mind. She had designed the life support systems that would keep 12,000 people alive during the journey. She had calculated the food production requirements, the water recycling needs, the power generation capacity. She had worked 18-hour days for months, sleeping in her office, eating meals at her desk, driven by the knowledge that failure meant extinction. When the solar flare came, the Wanderer was barely ready. Systems were still being tested. Storage compartments were still being filled. But there was no more time. Danny gave the order to launch, and 12,000 humans rose into the sky, leaving behind everything they had ever known. Lisa stood beside him as Earth grew smaller in the viewport. Neither of them spoke. There were no words for what they were feeling. Behind them, their world was dying. Ahead of them, there was only darkness and uncertainty. The original plan was to travel to a star called Tau Ceti, about 12 light years away. The journey would take 500 years. The passengers would be kept in suspended animation, waking only when they arrived at their new home. It was a desperate plan, built on untested technology and uncertain science. But it was the only plan they had. 3 months into the journey, disaster struck. A micrometeorite, smaller than a grain of sand, punched through the Wanderer's navigation array. The damage was not immediately obvious. The ship continued on its course, its computers making small adjustments that seemed normal at first. But those adjustments were wrong. Each tiny error compounded with the next, pushing the Wanderer further and further off course. By the time anyone realized what had happened, they were hopelessly lost. Danny and Lisa made the decision together. They would not wake the passengers and tell them they were doomed. They would not give up. Instead, they would adapt. The Wanderer was no longer a transport ship carrying sleeping colonists to a predetermined destination. It was now a generation ship, a moving world that would carry humanity through the void until they found somewhere new to live. The 12,000 passengers were woken in small groups. Danny and Lisa told them the truth, all of it, hiding nothing. They explained that Earth was gone, that they were lost, that no one was coming to save them. They also explained that they were going to survive anyway. They were going to build a civilization inside this metal shell. They were going to have children and raise them and teach them and prepare them for a future that none of the original passengers would live to see. Many people despaired. Some refused to accept their situation. A few chose to end their own lives rather than face the endless journey. But most, the vast majority, did something remarkable. They adapted. They found purpose. They fell in love and started families and built communities in the corridors and compartments of the Wanderer. Danny and Lisa were married on the ship's observation deck, with half the population watching. Their first child, a boy named Marcus, was born 2 years into the journey. He grew up knowing nothing but metal walls and artificial light, but he grew up happy. He grew up knowing that he was part of something important, part of humanity's great journey into the unknown. Danny died at the age of 91, surrounded by his children and grandchildren. His last words were spoken to Lisa, who had never left his side. He told her that he was proud of what they had built together. He told her that humanity would survive because of what they had started. And he told her that he had never stopped loving her, not for a single day of their long life together. Lisa lived for another 12 years, watching over the ship like a guardian spirit. She trained the next generation of leaders, teaching them everything she knew about engineering and survival and hope. When she finally passed away at the age of 94, the entire ship mourned. Her body was placed beside Danny's in a memorial chamber that would become the most sacred place on the Wanderer. Generations passed. Centuries became millennia. The original passengers died and were replaced by their children, who were replaced by their children in an unbroken chain that stretched across 40,000 years. The story of Danny and Lisa was told and retold, becoming legend, becoming myth, becoming something close to Holy Scripture. And through it all, the Wanderer continued on its journey, carrying humanity through the darkness toward a destination that no one could predict. When the ship's sensors finally detected a habitable planet, almost 40,000 years after the journey began. The captain was a quiet man named Sam Reyes. He had Danny's determination and Lisa's intelligence, though he did not know it. He had grown up hearing the old stories, never quite believing that there was anything beyond the metal walls of his world. But now he stood on the bridge, looking at a blue-green sphere hanging in the blackness of space. And he understood that everything was about to change. The journey was over. A new chapter was about to begin. Ambassador Crixolin had existed for 2 million years. She was a being of pure crystalline energy, ancient even by the standards of the Galactic Confederation. She had witnessed the rise and fall of 100 civilizations. She had negotiated peace treaties between species that had been at war for longer than most stars had burned. Nothing surprised her anymore, or so she thought. The Confederation Council had chosen her for this mission because of her patience and wisdom. When the human signal was detected, many species panicked. The Vorthan Collective, a race of shapeshifters who valued stability above all else, demanded that the humans be destroyed before they could become a threat. The Mind Swarm, a hive consciousness that controlled over 1,000 worlds, suggested quarantine and observation. The Crystalline Elders, Crixolin's own people, recommended caution and study. In the end, the Council decided to send a diplomatic vessel. Someone needed to make contact with these returned humans and determine what they wanted, who they were, and whether they posed a danger to galactic civilization. Crixolin volunteered for the mission. She was curious about the species that had survived against all odds. She wanted to understand how they had done it. Her ship entered the region of space where the human signal had originated, and immediately her expectations began to crumble. She had assumed she would find a single ship, perhaps damaged and barely functional, carrying a few hundred desperate survivors. She had prepared speeches of comfort and offers of assistance. She had brought medical supplies and food and technology that she thought the primitive humans might need. Instead, she found a fleet. 17 massive vessels surrounded her small diplomatic craft, each one larger than any ship the Confederation had built in the last 1,000,000 years. They were not pretty. They were not elegant. They were functional, brutal, designed for survival rather than beauty. But they worked. They moved with precision and power, their engines burning with energy signatures that Crixolin's instruments could barely measure. A voice came through her communication system. Human English, the ancient language, but spoken with an accent that had evolved over 40,000 years. Unknown vessel. This is the Human Defense Force. State your intentions or be destroyed. Crixolin had not been threatened in over 100,000 years. The experience was surprisingly unpleasant. She transmitted her diplomatic credentials and waited. After a tense few moments, the voice returned. Ambassador Crixolin, you are cleared to approach. Captain Sam Rees of the flagship New Dawn will receive you. Please follow the escort vessel. She was led to a massive station orbiting a blue-green planet. The station was the size of a small moon, covered with lights and docking bays and structures that suggested a population in the millions. Below, on the planet's surface, she could see cities glowing in the darkness, connected by networks of roads and transportation lines. This was not a handful of survivors. This was a civilization. Sam Rees met her in a large conference room with windows overlooking the planet. He was a small man by the standards of most galactic species, with gray hair and tired eyes. But those eyes held something that Crixolin recognized: intelligence, determination, and something else, something she had not seen in a very long time: hope. Welcome to New Haven, Sam said. The first world we colonized after leaving the Wanderer. We have 16 more now, spread across this sector. Population is difficult to count exactly, but our last census put it somewhere around 4 trillion. Crixolin's crystalline form flickered with shock. 4 trillion. The humans had not just survived. They had multiplied beyond anything the Confederation had ever seen from a species so young. How is this possible? She asked. Your species was considered primitive. You had barely reached your own moon when the solar event occurred. Sam smiled, and there was no arrogance in it, only a quiet pride. We adapted, he said. That's what humans do. We face impossible situations and we find ways through them. The Wanderer was never meant to be a generation ship, but we made it one. Our ancestors were never meant to survive for 40,000 years in the void, but they did. And when we finally found a home, we built on everything they had taught us. He led her on a tour of the station, showing her the schools where human children learned, alongside artificial intelligences that had been designed as partners rather than tools. He showed her the hospitals where diseases that had killed millions in the ancient world were now cured in hours. He showed her the research facilities where scientists worked on problems that would take centuries to solve, confident that their descendants would finish what they started. Everywhere Crixolem looked, she saw something that had become rare in the galaxy: progress, growth, a species that was still becoming something more than it had been. "Your people," she said finally. "You remember where you came from. You tell the old stories." Sam nodded. "We never forgot." Danny Cole and Lisa Murray, the founders. Every child knows their names. Every family has a copy of the old histories. We lost our world ambassador, but we never lost ourselves. Crixolem thought about her own people, the crystalline elders who had grown so old that they had forgotten more than most species would ever know. They no longer told stories. They no longer remembered their beginnings. They simply existed, ancient and powerful and empty. Humanity was different. Humanity remembered. She looked at Sam Reyes, this small, fragile creature from a species that the galaxy had written off as dead. And she felt something she had not felt in a million years: respect. "I believe," she said slowly, "that the galaxy has underestimated your species." Sam's smile widened. "Yes," he said, "they have. And I think they're about to find out just how much." The Galactic Confederation Council had not held an emergency session in over 3,000 years. The last time had been when the Void Plague threatened to wipe out life in the Spiral Arm. Before that, it had been the Machine Uprising of the 7th millennium. These were events that shook the foundations of galactic civilization. Now, the Council was gathering again. Because of humans. Ambassador Crix Oli's report had spread through the Confederation like fire through dry grass. 17 star systems, 4 trillion population, technology that rivaled or exceeded many of the elder species. The humans had not just survived, they had thrived. They had built an empire in the darkness while the rest of the galaxy forgot. They existed. And now they wanted to come home. The council chamber was a vast sphere, floating in the center of an artificial nebula, designed to accommodate species of every size and form. Beings of light hovered near the ceiling. Aquatic creatures floated in suspended spheres of water. Hive minds sent representatives that buzzed and clicked in their crystalline pods. And in the center of it all, a single human stood waiting to address them. Her name was Grace Holloway. She was 32 years old, born on a world called Haven's Rest, the 7th planet colonized after the Wanderer found its first home. She was not a soldier or a scientist. She was a teacher, someone who had spent her life explaining things to people who did not understand. The Human Council had chosen her for exactly that reason. The chamber fell silent as she stepped forward. Thousands of alien eyes, sensors, and perceptual organs focused on her small form. 40,000 years ago, Grace began, her voice steady and clear. My ancestors watched their world burn. They sent out distress signals on every frequency they knew. They begged for help from anyone who might be listening. She paused, letting the words settle. No one answered. A ripple passed through the assembly. Some species shifted uncomfortably. Others remained perfectly still. The Galactic Confederation detected the solar event that destroyed Earth. Grace continued. The records are clear. You saw what was happening. You had ships that could have reached us in time. And you made a decision. You decided that humans were too primitive, too insignificant, too unimportant to save. The Vorthan representative, a shifting mass of gray fluid, spoke up. The decision was made according to standard protocols. Your species had not yet developed faster than light travel. You were not members of the Confederation. We had no obligation. No obligation, Grace repeated, her voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the chamber. 12 billion people died on Earth, mothers and fathers, children who never got to grow up, artists and scientists and farmers and teachers. 12 billion lives, and you had no obligation to save them. The Vorthan fell silent. I did not come here to demand an apology, Grace said. I did not come here to seek revenge. Those 12 billion are gone, and nothing can bring them back. I came here to tell you something that you need to understand. She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of species that had existed for millions of years, civilizations that had mastered technologies beyond human comprehension. You wrote us off as a failure, she said. A minor tragedy in the long history of the cosmos. You logged our extinction and moved on to other matters. But here is what you did not understand about humans. Her voice rose, filling the chamber with a strength that seemed impossible from such a small body. We do not give up. We do not accept defeat. You can burn our world, scatter us across the void, leave us for dead in the darkness between stars. And we will crawl back. We will build again. We will find each other again. We will survive. The chamber was utterly silent. 40,000 years, Grace said. That is how long it took us to find our way back. 40,000 years of struggle and sacrifice and loss. Generations who lived and died without ever seeing a sky or breathing fresh air. Children who grew up knowing nothing but metal walls and artificial light. They kept going. They never stopped. Because that is what humans do. She straightened her shoulders, standing taller than her small frame should have allowed. We are not asking for your approval. We are not asking for your help. We came here as a courtesy, to inform you that humanity has returned. Our 17 systems lie outside your current borders. We have no desire for war. We seek only to live in peace and to continue growing as a civilization. Grace paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was softer but no less powerful. But understand this clearly. We will never again depend on others for our survival. We will never again wait for rescue that does not come. We have learned our lesson. We have learned that the universe does not care about us, that no one will save us but ourselves. And we have accepted that truth. She looked directly at the Vorthan representative, then at the Mindswarm, then at the crystalline elders, one by one making eye contact with every major power in the Confederation. If you choose to be our friends, we will welcome you. If you choose to be our enemies, we will defend ourselves. And if you choose to ignore us as you did 40,000 years ago, that is your right. But do not underestimate us again. Do not assume that our small size means weakness. Do not assume that our short lives mean we cannot plan for centuries. Do not assume that our emotions make us foolish. Grace smiled, and there was something fierce in it, something ancient and unbreakable. We are humanity. We have crossed 40,000 years of darkness to stand before you today, and we are just getting started. The chamber remained silent for a long moment after she finished speaking. Then, slowly, Crixolin began to glow brighter, the crystalline equivalent of applause. Other species joined in, each expressing approval in their own way. Not all of them. Some remained cold and hostile, but enough of them understood. Humanity had returned, and the galaxy would have to make room. 10 years had passed since Grace Holloway addressed the Galactic Confederation Council. 10 years of negotiations, treaties, cultural exchanges, and slow, careful steps towards something that neither side had expected. friendship, humanity, had been admitted to the Confederation not as a junior member, not as a species under protection, but as an equal partner with full voting rights. The decision had not been unanimous. The Vorthan Collective still viewed humans with suspicion. The Mindswarm monitored human expansion with constant vigilance. But the majority of species had come to accept what Ambassador Crixolan had understood from her first meeting with Sam Reyes. Humans were not a threat. They were an opportunity. The technology they had developed during their long isolation proved revolutionary. Their approach to artificial intelligence, treating synthetic minds as companions and partners rather than tools and servants, offered solutions to problems that the Confederation had struggled with for eons. Their medicine, developed in the desperate conditions of the Wanderer, could cure diseases that had plagued other species for millennia. Their engineering, refined through 40,000 years of necessity, was efficient and practical in ways that older civilizations had forgotten how to achieve. But their greatest contribution could not be measured or quantified. It could not be traded or sold or written into treaties. Hope. Species that had grown old and tired, civilizations that had lost their sense of purpose, found themselves inspired by these strange, stubborn creatures who had crawled back from extinction. If humanity could survive against such impossible odds, what else might be possible? What other miracles might be achieved by those who refused to give up? The Crystalline Elders, Crixolan's people, began telling stories again for the first time in 1,000,000 years. The Mindswarm started a new research initiative, their first in 10,000 years. Even the Vorthan Collective, slowly and reluctantly, began to explore new ideas rather than simply maintaining their ancient stability. Humanity had reminded the galaxy what it had forgotten: that growth was still possible, that the future could be different from the past. That hope was not foolishness, but the very foundation of progress. On the anniversary of the Wanderer's signal, a ceremony was held on Earth itself. The homeworld had been healing slowly under careful restoration. The radiation was gone. The atmosphere was stable. Plants and animals from human colony worlds had been carefully reintroduced. After 40,000 years, Earth was coming back to life. Samrus stood at the center of the ceremony, now elderly, but still sharp-eyed. His wife Katie had passed away 3 years earlier, but he could feel her presence beside him as he looked out at the gathered crowd. Humans and aliens stood together, species that had never met before, sharing this moment of remembrance and celebration. Beside him stood Grace Holloway, no longer a young teacher, but a respected diplomat and leader. She had spent the last decade building bridges between humanity and the rest of the galaxy, working tirelessly to ensure that the peace they had achieved would last. Together, they unveiled a memorial to Danny Cole and Lisa Murray. The statue showed them standing side by side, looking up at the stars. Danny had his hand raised, pointing toward the unknown. Lisa held a tablet covered in equations and designs. At the base of the statue, words were carved in 100 different languages, human and alien alike. They believed. They kept going. They showed us the way. They never saw this, Sam said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. They never knew if any of it would work. They just did what they thought was right, and they hoped. Grace nodded, watching as children from a dozen species played together on the green grass that had finally returned to humanity's homeworld. Human children ran alongside crystalline younglings and Vorthan shapeshifters. They laughed and shouted and played games that combined elements from all their different cultures. That is the secret, Grace said. That has always been the secret. We believe, even when it is irrational. Even when logic says we should stop. Even when the odds are impossible. We believe, and we keep going. Sam looked at her. This woman who had faced down the most powerful beings in the galaxy with nothing but words and courage. Do you think they would be proud? He asked. Danny and Lisa, if they could see what we have become? Grace considered the question carefully. She thought about the 17 star systems that humanity now called home. She thought about the trillions of human lives that had been built on the foundation that two frightened people had laid 40,000 years ago. She thought about the friendships that were forming between species, the knowledge that was being shared, the future that was being built. I think they would be amazed, she said. And I think they would say that we are not finished yet, that the journey is still continuing, that humanity still has so much more to become. Above them, the sun shone down, the same star that had nearly destroyed humanity at the beginning of their journey. It was gentler, now stable, carefully monitored by human scientists who would never let it threaten their homeworld again. And across the galaxy, the signal that had started everything still echoed in the memories of 100 species. The voice of a small ship lost in the darkness, reaching out across the void. Humanity endures. We are coming home. They had come home. But home was no longer just one planet or one system. Home was wherever humans built communities and raised families and told the old stories. Home was the Wanderer, preserved now as a museum ship orbiting New Haven. Home was 17 worlds and counting, each one different. Each one uniquely human. And home was here, on Earth, where everything had begun and where everything had been reborn. Sam Reus looked up at the stars as evening fell. The same stars that his ancestors had watched from this very spot 40,000 years ago. Different constellations now, shifted by the passage of time, but still the same stars, the same universe, the same endless frontier. Humanity had crossed that frontier once. They would cross it again, not because they had to, but because they wanted to, because exploration was in their blood. Because the unknown called to them in voices they could not ignore. The journey was not over. It would never be over. That was the human way. And somewhere in the darkness between stars, the spirit of Danny Cole and Lisa Murray smiled down at their children's children, proud of what they had become, excited for what they would become next. The last human signal had shocked the entire galaxy. But it was only the beginning of humanity's story, not the end. The best was still to come.